Welcome to part 3 or week 3 of my Unhitched webinar short series. This is a series of short, easily digestible little webinars that are about 20 minutes, maybe a little more, maybe a little less, covering some of the most common issues and questions that I hear in my practice. So this week we are talking about how to know whether to stay or go. Last week, that was part 1 of how to know whether to stay or go. We talked about some considerations, things to think about beforehand. This week, and actually in the next few weeks to follow, we're going to be talking about collecting clues. So some of the tools and exercises that I use with my clients to help you know whether to stay or go. And so I was going to just do this as a 2-parter, considerations and then clues this week. But as I was preparing for this week, it started just getting bigger and bigger. And I thought, you know what, if I'm going to keep these short, easily digestible, we're going to have to separate this into multiple parts. So I think right now we're going to be dealing with maybe 4, maybe even 5 parts. But for today, just know that we're going to be working on collecting clues. And we will be continuing to collect clues for the next few weeks following this. So you are in the right place for this webinar if you are kind of in that stay or go zone, really looking at the question of whether you want to stay in the marriage or whether it's time to go. And this can be a teeter-totter that you ride for years. And what I see often is that, you'll have some good things that happen in the marriage. I can keep going a little longer. It's not too bad. And then something big, but then maybe fear comes in, maybe some doubts come in, and then you just stay a little bit longer. And before you know it, a year has gone by, 2 years have gone by, and you're just continually riding that teeter-totter of some good, some bad, and not really knowing what you ultimately want to do. And so I personally rode this teeter-totter for several years. I had a lot of marital therapy during my marriage and had a lot of questions. And there were days that I woke up ready to leave with the clothes on my back. And there were days when I thought, oh, I just need to stick it out a little bit longer. Maybe this will happen, or maybe I just need to wait until this happens. And that day never came until I made the decision that was right for me. It wasn't going to be a result of external circumstances. It needed to be coming from my own inner guidance and inner wisdom. And so that's what I want to help you do, is figure out what it is that is right for you. So before we dive into our content, if you are new to my work, I am a recovering attorney. I am a practicing master life coach. I am the radio host of a little show called Sunny in Seattle. And I'm also the author of the Amazon bestseller, Unhitched, Unlock Your Courage and Clarity to Unstick Your Bad Marriage. My work has been featured in Oprah Magazine and Best Self. I've worked with the Collaborative Professionals of Washington at their annual conference. And I've been in a couple of other publications and Hay House Radio, some other things you might know. And more importantly, perhaps than any of all those credentials, though, is the fact that I'm a divorcee and I've been where you are. And I had a pretty high conflict marriage that went into a surprisingly graceful divorce, followed by an even more surprising post-divorce friendship with my ex-husband. Our relationship actually improved after the marriage. And so the tools that we use to get to that healing place, I now give to my clients. So sometimes that means you heal the marriage, and sometimes it means you have the clarity and the courage to go. And so that's what we're working on today, is how to know whether to stay or go. So as I mentioned, we'll be here today for about 20 minutes. We're working on part 2 and beyond of how to know whether to stay or go. In terms of collecting the clues today, the 2 topics that I'm going to be focusing on are some questions to ask yourself, number 1, and then number 2, using your body as a messenger, because it's not always something that we're taught to do. So I want to show you how to do that. In the coming weeks, in terms of collecting clues, some of the things we'll be looking at are your thoughts, things that come up like thoughts about whether you should or shouldn't go, thoughts about what will happen if you do go, fears and painful thoughts. Those are the ones we're really going to be looking at. So what to do with those and how to dissolve them. And then beyond that, in the subsequent weeks, we'll be looking at involving your spirit in the process. So really turning to your intuition, learning how to tap into your inner guidance and how to recognize it when it does come up. So that's your little roadmap. So returning to what we're going to do for today, collecting clues in terms of some questions to ask yourself and also the body as a messenger. Before we dive in, I have a caveat for all of this, or a little preface for you. I mentioned this in previous weeks, but it is my belief, not only in my own experience, but that of my clients and some of the teachers whose work I respect the most in this field, that it really only takes one person to shift a marriage. It can take one person to heal things. It can take one person to change things. And when you're doing your own inner scenery work, we've talked about inner scenery in previous weeks. So basically inner scenery being the things you do to do your own work, to clean up your side of the marital street, to fix what's going on with you first and foremost, and then outer scenery being changing the externals, like leaving the marriage, getting a new job, moving locations to a different location. So when you're doing inner scenery work, often that can be enough to shift things, and you would be surprised. And I shared some stories in previous webinars about when you do the inner scenery work, what is possible. So it is my firm belief, and I've seen it happen, that it only takes one person to shift a marriage and to change it and potentially heal it. Now, as I've mentioned in previous webinars, if you're married to a narcissist, a sociopath, a psychopath, an addict, some of these rules really don't apply. So that's a little different scenario. Just take my contact information at the end of the webinar if you have questions about that. But just put that as the little side digression there, that if you're married to a narcissist, sociopath, psychopath, addict, that there are some other considerations here, and it may take more than one person to shift things. That said, it also only takes one person to know if it's time to go. And I say this, I'm going to share a little quote that I heard from Liz Gilbert. And it was something that she said in the Super Soul conversation with Oprah that I thought was really meaningful. And it was something that I needed to hear. Unfortunately, I didn't hear it while I was still in my marriage, but I'm sharing it with you in case it is something that you need to hear. So when I say it also only takes one person to end the marriage, I say this because some people need permission. You have been told by your church, by your culture, by your parents, by any number of outside sources that it's not okay to leave your marriage. It's not okay to want more. It's not okay to change your mind after you have taken vows. And I just want to offer, from where I sit, let me be the one that gives you permission to make the decision that is right for you, because ultimately you are the one that this is going to affect. And so the quote from Liz that I want to share here, and this applies, she's talking about women here, but if you are a man and you are hearing this, this applies equally to you. So the quote goes, "There are still just huge swaths of women who never got the memo that their lives belong to them. And there's this instinct that they have that they need a permission slip from the principal's office for anything." And Liz is saying here that she felt like in some way Eat, Pray, Love kind of was that permission slip. Honestly, her book was part of the catalysts, or one of the catalysts that were pivotal for me in starting to make efforts toward getting out of the marriage, because I knew that it wasn't right for me. And ultimately, even with all the inner scenery work in the world, it was something where I had to recognize that I did not want to be in that marriage anymore. And that was okay. Even if it wasn't okay for a lot of other people in my life, that was the decision that was best for me. So permission granted. And let me just add on to that. I mentioned this in previous webinars. Just know that if you do decide to go, often divorce can be trading one set of problems for another. So the grass may be greener. It was greener for me, but it took a long time to get to that greener grass, and it took a lot of work. So just be ready that it may be the right decision for you to go, but there may be some bumps along the way. That is okay. It doesn't mean you've made the wrong choice. It just means that you're human, and divorce has some complicating legal issues, some complicating social issues, some complicating personal issues, and that's okay too. But just know that this is like informed consent in medical treatment. I want you to be informed when you make the decision. I want you to know that you know that you know that you're ready to go, and also when it's time to go, that you have the courage and the information that you needed to make the decision. You are able to weigh the risks and the benefits. And as we'll talk about in upcoming weeks, sometimes all of the information, the pros and cons lists that you will make, all of that is sometimes trumped by your own inner guidance. And we'll talk about how to tap into that in coming weeks. But I just want you to be informed, and I want you to know that you have the permission to make the decision that's right for you once you have all of your facts and what's important for you. Okay, so I do want to share also, because I think it's important here, to give you an example around this. So in my case, my ex-husband, who became a wonderful friend after the divorce, but while we were married, we had a high conflict marriage. We were two strong-willed attorneys. There was a lot of fighting involved. And it came from both sides. He was not always the aggressor, even though he was a very skilled attorney, and I often felt like I was on a witness stand when we were having our conflicts. I was an equal participant in creating some of that conflict. So all that said, when it came down to it, he wasn't an abuser, he wasn't an addict, and he wasn't an adulterer. He also wasn't that narcissist, sociopath, psychopath, cluster B personality disorder diagnosis either. So I say that because when I made the decision to go, I didn't have one thing that I could pin it on, that he'd had the affair that was irreparably damaging to our marriage, that he was addicted to a drug that he just couldn't let go no matter how much treatment that we tried to get him. He wasn't an abuser. He wasn't any of the things that when I was growing up, I was told were the only reasons you were allowed to leave a marriage. So when I ended up leaving, I had to make a very brave choice and just say, I have changed. My values have changed. What I want out of a marriage, no matter how much inner scenery work we do, it's not going to be enough for me anymore. And it's okay for me to admit that. He didn't like the decision. A lot of our family did not like that decision. I had very supportive parents, but I'm talking about more extended family and in-laws and things. And so there were some sticking points there where folks had a hard time understanding. But ultimately, I had to be brave enough to say, this marriage is not enough for me anymore, and that is okay. And that's where that permission comes in. Other people are not going to give you permission, or they may say, they give you permission, but ultimately the decision has to be yours and come from a place of your own inner knowing. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today and in the coming weeks is how do you know that inner knowing, and what are some of the clues that you can collect to help you get your facts and get your knowing and get all of that in place so that when you do decide to make big changes, you know they're coming from a strong foundation. Okay, so for today, the two things we're covering, remember, are a couple of questions to ask yourself, and then number two, using your body as a messenger. Okay, so one of the first questions I want you to ask, and this was something that I saw in my own life, and I'm actually going to share my screen here and share a little quote. It's about chaos. Okay, so bear with me while I share my screen. Okay. So this is a quote from Nancy Levin. She's an author and a Hay House radio host, and I really like her work. So the quote, for those who may be listening to this later or can't see the video, we create chaos when we avoid the truth. We create chaos when we avoid the truth. And so Nancy says this, and I'll share from her story. So she was in a marriage that was pretty unhappy. He wasn't an abuser, an addict, or an adulterer either, but she was just unhappy in her marriage. And ultimately, she ended up having an affair. I don't have any judgment around that. It definitely creates some issues, I think, whether you're caught or not. So yeah, use caution when you're going into that territory for sure. But for Nancy, she had the affair, it was done, and she journaled about it. And this journal that she kept, she at a certain point in the marriage, consciously or unconsciously, left it in a place where her spouse could find it. And leaving a journal out for a spouse to potentially find in a place that's pretty obvious that writes about this affair that you've had is something that can definitely implode a marriage or create some chaos that could ultimately be the demise of the marriage. So I share this because I remember reading about when I was making this decision myself, and I just discovered the writing of Dr. Martha Beck, and she was talking about how When we are doing things that are not in accordance with our right life, often there will be these parts of us that get pretty rebellious. And so when you're supposed to go, the example that she used, I believe, was she was supposed to go to some like obligation with her mother-in-law. And this was an example not from Martha's own life, but that she was using in her book, maybe perhaps from a client, but that every time she was supposed to go to this appointment with her mother-in-law, she'd end up getting drunk in the hot tub, drinking Kahlua. And it's kind of a silly example, but it really is, I think, indicative of the bigger issue that we create chaos when we avoid the truth. We create self-sabotage when we avoid the truth. In my own life, I was pretty darn unhappy in my marriage, and I started pushing the bounds of what any marriage could take. Meaning that I was out drinking a lot. I was staying out late. I was going on girls' trips. I was not engaged in the marriage. I was engaging in behavior that just was really not reflective of who I really was at my most core level with my integrity. It was behavior that was hoping that it would trigger my husband to make the decision that I was too scared to make, to put the brakes on the marriage because I couldn't say what I truly wanted. And so instead I did the more cowardly route of creating a whole lot of chaos in hopes that he would just say, okay, Sonny, just go, this is over. He didn't ultimately do that. He's a pretty strong, or he was a pretty strong-willed and stubborn person who was committed in a lot stronger way than I was. And so I had to ultimately become really brave and just say what I wanted instead of doing the self-imposed chaos. So the question to ask yourself is, if any of what I'm saying is resonating for you, are you creating chaos in an attempt to avoid the truth? I've had clients, other clients who have, just like Nancy, had affairs in hopes that they will be found out subconsciously in most cases, so that the marriage will be over, because it's a lot easier to do that than say to someone's face who you've taken vows with, I don't want to be in this marriage anymore and it's not for me. So just, are you doing some self-imposed chaos? Okay, first question. Second question, when you're looking at this, and this one is a pretty simple one, but it's something that I return to a lot, and it basically has to do with gauging pain versus fear. So has the pain of staying put in the marriage exceeded your fear of the unknown? And this one I find more as a tipping point. So there are, as I mentioned at the beginning, you may be on this teeter-totter. There's a lot of good stuff still happening, and then there's a lot of bad stuff. And some days you're ready to go, and the next day you wake up and the fear creeps back in and you stay. And so this one is more of a cumulative effect. Over time, over years, over decades perhaps, has the pain of staying put exceeded your fear of the unknown? One of the biggest reasons I see people staying in a marriage is because of fear. And we're going to talk more about fear next week. And then I have even a special one devoted to fear that we'll do in coming weeks. But just as a general matter, has your pain of staying put exceeded your fear of the unknown? And have you reached the tipping point on that? Okay, so that's question 2. And then question number 3 that I want you to ask yourself, and this one again is a very simple one. I heard this from a therapist once, and it was amazing how obvious the answer was to me, and I'd never asked myself the question. So if it provides you some guidance, and again, we're just collecting clues. This isn't the end-all be-all question. This is an indicator and something you may not have thought of yet. So if you were to come home today and your spouse's bags were packed at the foot of the stairs, and this person looked in your eyes and said, I think it's time that we get separated, or I think it's time we end things. Is there some part of you that feels relief? Would you be relieved if you came home and saw those bags packed? And again, this is not the end-all be-all question, but if I had been honest with myself back then, there was that relief that would have happened if he had just been the one to do it, to make the hard decision. That would have provided me great relief. And instead, I did the self-imposed chaos that I mentioned. But for you, does this provide you some relief if you were to envision that happening? And if so, that's a piece of information. That's a clue to consider. Okay, so those are the 3 questions that you might want to ask yourself. So now we're going to turn to the second part of today's webinar, which is using the body as a messenger. So we'll be talking about this next week, about our mind, but just know that most neuroscientists would tell you that your mind is a spin doctor. It does the best it can with limited information, and it often, we absorb a lot of information from our family of origin and positions, people in authority growing up. We also collect a lot of fearful, painful thoughts like, I shouldn't leave, divorce is not an option, I'll never be able to support myself, I will damage my children, my life will never be the same, I may not find anybody again. All of those are thoughts, and your mind is just spinning in that place. That can be a place of pretty dangerous territory. It's the neighborhood you don't want to go into at night by yourself. So I will be teaching you some tools to deal with that, but just know for now that your mind is the spin doctor, and what is going on in your head in terms of your thoughts may not be the truth. Very likely they aren't. So know that on the flip side, your body is the incorruptible truth teller. Your body is the one that will be able to connect you with your deepest inner wisdom. So you think about a polygraph test. There is a reason that these are used in investigations, because when a human who is not a sociopath or a psychopath speaks an untruth, there's an immediate and automatic physical response in the body. Increased perspiration, respiration, eye blinking, there's usually muscular contraction. And so in that same vein, just as if you speak an untruth and there's a body reaction, if you are living a life that is not in alignment with your truth, your body is going to react. I'm just going to show you or tell you a very abbreviated way, because when I work with clients, we do this, we calibrate your individual body compass to know how your body speaks to you. But just know the general threads or general themes are, when you are moving in the direction in your right life, or your right life, what is best for you, your body is going to react in a way that feels light and expansive. And the people, the places, the things that are moving you in the direction of your right life are going to feel light and expansive in your body. And I'm going to give you an example of this. I'll just use myself here in a moment. On the flip side, or on the other hand, things, people, places, things that are moving you away from your right life will feel constricting and heavy in the body. Just like when you tell a lie and the polygraph picks it up, there's usually that physical reaction in the body. When you're doing something that is not true for you, your body is going to react. Staying in a marriage that is not right for you, your body will react. Leaving a marriage when it's not right for you, your body will react. So in my life, this is well before I had any of these tools, and I was living straight out of my head, listening to all the fearful thoughts, and they were just keeping me in this loop of teeter-totter, stuckness, stay or go. I should, I shouldn't, I should, I shouldn't. So I had a really good therapist at the time, and I would come in and I would sit like this, arms crossed across my chest, my shoulders up around my ears. And I didn't know this at the time, but humans suppress emotion through muscular contraction and shallow breathing. And that's the zone that I was living in, just trying to suppress all these emotions and the knowing that I knew and the feelings that I felt. I didn't want any of it, because it would have indicated that I needed to go, and I wasn't ready to go there yet. I wasn't ready to admit that to myself yet. So what she said to me one day was, Sunny, uncross your arms, let your shoulders relax, take a deep breath. And I did, and all of a sudden, I started to cry. And this cinder block, I realized there had been this cinder block in my chest that I had been carrying. And when I thought about staying in my old life, that's when the cinder block really made itself known. And so during this time, I came across a quote. It was a book that I was reading during my separation and leading up to my separation. And there was this quote that I would return to almost daily. It was dog-eared in the book. And it was a quote that was paraphrased from the Buddha. And it helped me recognize that feeling of knowing the light, expansive, leading me toward my right life versus contracting and heavy and leading me away from my right life. And the quote goes like this: you will know that you have encountered a body of water that is the ocean because it will taste of salt. In the same way, you will know enlightenment and truth because it will taste of freedom. Not safety, not comfort, but freedom. And I could at least viscerally feel when I envisioned staying, it felt not freedom. It felt heavy and constricting. And when I envisioned going, even though I didn't know what would happen when I jumped off that cliff of leaving, I didn't know what the unknown held, and there was fear. But when I envisioned going even toward that unknown, I felt light and expansive. I felt free in the body. And here's a caveat here that I always like to say. Being married or single has nothing to do with freedom. Like, just because you're single doesn't mean you're free, and married, not free. I've been partnered for 7 years in a more committed relationship than I feel like my marriage ever was. And I feel infinitely free because it supports who I truly am. It supports my authentic, essential self. On the flip side, I had created a marriage that did not support my essential, authentic self. And as a result, it didn't feel free. So married or unmarried has nothing to do with freedom. It really has to do with, are you going towards your right life, your best life, your authentic self, your essential self, the part of you that has your best destiny already out ahead of you that you are just moving toward. So I would invite you to go to your body as the messenger for what is your incorruptible truth, knowing that light and expansive is leading you toward freedom, knowing that heavy and constricting is not. So those are the questions to be asking. Those are the ways that you can use the body as a messenger. And if you have questions about this, I'm going to tell you how to contact me at the end here in just a few moments. If you want to know how to calibrate your own body compass and know how to answer some of these questions that we talked about today in a way that is true for you. So some of the pitfalls that I see when people are in the stay or go zone and they're asking these questions is, they're ignoring the clues. Just like I didn't want to recognize what was true for me and it took a long time, you ignore the clues. And at best, this creates a place of stagnation and stuckness. And it's kind of exhausting to be in this zone of not pushing your truth away or not even looking at the clues that could be leading you towards your truth. And at worst, I see for some people the signs, the whispers become roars. And even though you're not listening to them, you may get hit with the cosmic 2x4. And I'm not saying that to create fear. I'm just saying it's interesting, all the stories I hear. It's like, there are those rumble strips on the side of the road, and you start to veer off the road, and the rumble strips are the thing that tell you to get back on the path, the right path. If you were hitting rumble strips, if you don't listen to the rumble strips, you could end up off the road. So I'm just saying that listen to the clues. And even if it's hard to listen to the clues, you don't have to do anything yet. You don't have to take any action. Just start recognizing your truth. And some of the things that we did today will help you do that. Now, if you want to take this further and you want to ask me some specific questions about this, of course, you can always continue to keep attending these webinars. And we're going to be covering a lot of different ground here. If you want to talk about your unique situation, if you want to ask me some specific questions, because I know this is a very personal topic, I'm just going to drop in the chat box a link to my scheduler. Get on there and we'll have a complimentary consult and we'll talk about what you've got going on. Or another thing, if you're just listening to this later on, if you are hearing the recording and you don't have video access, then I encourage you to go to the website where you can download my book for free, which talks about all of the things I'm talking about on the webinar. The book is Unhitched, Unlock Your Courage and Clarity to Unstick Your Bad Marriage. Getting unhitched doesn't necessarily mean divorce. It just means getting unstuck, whether that means healing the marriage or leaving, whatever is the right, highest and best interest for you and your family. So the book is Unhitched. The website to go to download it is unhitchedbook.com. That's unhitchedbook.com. And you can also find my contact information there. So thank you so much for joining me for week 2. This was week 3, wasn't it? So thank you so much for joining me for week 3 as we're continuing to collect clues and knowing whether to stay or go. Next week, join me as we talk about how to manage the mind and all those fears that come up, the painful thoughts like, I can't leave this marriage because I won't be able to support myself. It will damage my kids. What will my family think of me? All those things that come up, we're going to be talking about how to deal with those next week. So thank you for joining me. Take care, everybody.